We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Saturday. The weekend is finally here, y'all. You made it. Congratulations. We're grateful to have you along with us today on rumble.com/amradpod is where you find us every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 Eastern time. If you haven't already, reminder, please give us a thumbs up, give us a like. Subscribe if your heart compels you. Definitely follow the program. We're over 5,000 followers. Tell a friend. If we double up, we'll get to 10,000, and maybe Rumble will start to share the show a little bit more often. If you listen to the audio format of the show on iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, any of those streaming platforms, make sure you subscribe there because we drop the audio format of the show there right after we get done today. Grateful again to have you with us on a Saturday. Going to be a little bit more of the status quo, the normal fare of an American Radicals podcast. Saturday, it's a Saturday grab bag. The only exception today is that at GOB Actual, my co-host, my compadre, my fellow American Radical is still out. One more day. He'll be back with us next week. So you got at Real Steve Friend here, and we've got a bunch of stories to churn and burn through. It's going to include the conversations about the communist judges and prosecutors who exist and still operate within the United States of America. A question about whether globalists, maybe worldwide communists, are possibly in trouble. I don't think so. Government bonuses are being offered for having babies. I got a couple of problems with that one. And then we're going to close it out with a story from Wired Magazine about artificial intelligence assisting the police with entrapping vulnerable people into the playbook that we like to hammer here. So we're going to get to all of that and a whole bunch more that we will push on through as fast as we can. But before we do, let's thank the sponsor for today's show, which is the M-Clip Company. m-clip.com. These are money clips, guys. They've been in business for 20 years, family owned, operating in the great state of Georgia. They're hand assembled luxury goods. They're luxury and they will not break the bank. They'll not break the bank because when you go to m-clip.com, you can use our promo code, which is suspendable, SUSPENDABLE, to get 10% off. And that includes everything. It includes the suspendable money clips. It also includes the ones that have your initials monogrammed on them, the metallic, the baseball ones, all of that available to you at a discount that is proprietary to this program, to the American Radicals Podcast at m-clip.com. Promo code is suspendable. So guys, without further ado, I want to get to the first one. And it's a Saturday. Let's just ease on into the heavy stuff. Let's have a little bit of a laugh because we didn't talk about it very much on this program. I know a lot of other ones did around the content creation space. They talked about the Blue Origin astronauts, the all-female space crew that boarded essentially like a roller coaster because they didn't build the rocket. They didn't operate the rocket. It was just remotely flown up into the air. They were very excited to do it because they were breaking through the glass ceiling. I was happy because for at least a brief time, we got rid of the worst people on earth, at least a couple of them, the liberal white women who live in the suburbs and want to cut off their children's genitals to impress their friends at Sunday brunch. We got rid of them. We actually ejected them from our atmosphere for a couple of minutes, but we did have this video just showing how ridiculous it was. And then we got a little bit of an update as to what their status is as actual astronauts.
Got it? 1, 2, 3, taking up space! Flynn, bye. You look.
Flynn, I gotcha. I gotcha, Flynn.
Gotcha. Proud of you. Oh, the moon! You guys, I will have to tell you, look at the moon. That's amazing.
Wow, look at the blue line.
Okay. Now it's time to look out.
So they took stuffed animals and butterfly cutouts and flowers with them into space, but they're legitimate, authentic astronauts. because girl power, women in the workplace. Spice Girls should have been playing the entire time there. But the lighthearted note that I wanted to bring your attention was that we actually had a response from a principal within the United States government as to the status of the Blue Origin crew, the flight crew. I mean, crew indicates you actually had something to do with operating the vehicle when you're going up and leaving our atmosphere and maybe returning it back down safely. They were just riders on a ride. I wouldn't call it necessarily a space mission, but then again, I'm not necessarily up to speed with the FAA, but you know who is? That's Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Sean Duffy, who weighed in on his social media because that's the timeline that we exist on now. We have members of the president's cabinet who feel compelled to go to social media and respond. This is a statement from Secretary Sean Duffy, who's actually a pretty good guy. Talked to him a couple times. The U.S. commercial space industry is an inspiring project which showcases American ingenuity and exceptionalism, but the last FAA guidelines under the Commercial Space Astronaut Wings program were clear. Crew members who travel into space must have, quote, demonstrated activities during flight that were essential to public safety or contributed to human spaceflight safety, unquote. The crew who flew to space this week on an automated flight by Blue Origin were brave and glam. Nicely done, Secretary Duffy. But you cannot identify as an astronaut. They do not meet the FAA astronaut criteria. And that's despite everything that Katy Perry came out and talked about, how you just got to believe in yourself. You have to trust yourself and you can get in touch with the divine feminine spirit. No, sorry, Katie. You're not an astronaut. You just went along for a very expensive airplane ride, which is now actually in dispute as to whether or not it was a space flight. But I'm not going to delve too deep into that. I just thought it was a fun way to kick us off here on a Saturday grab bag. Not really a whole lot of cohesiveness to this. I'm just going to be reaching in. And yes, I will show you because this is an ongoing dispute. Steve Friend, at Real Steve Friend, has not one, but two hands. And I will reach into the grab bag and pull out the next story that we got today. And this one comes from the Telegraph. So we're going to go overseas for a couple of these. And it is a concerning story to me because it is about the climate paganism, which I'm sure Katy Perry subscribes to, as do all the other members of the flight crew aboard the Blue Origin space flight. They're not astronauts, but they are climate pagans, no doubt, unquestionably. And overseas, in the UK, they are now approving experiments to dim the sun. And that's actually going to start relatively soon, shortly. The UK government is approving geoengineering experiments, outdoor field trials, which could include injecting aerosols into the atmosphere or brightening clouds to reflect sunshine, are being considered by scientists as a way to prevent runaway climate change. Professor Mark Symes, the program director for AREA, which stands for Advanced Research and Invention Agency, said there would be small, controlled outdoor experiments on particular approaches. Everything we do, this is according to Professor Symes, quote, everything we do is going to be safe by design. We're absolutely committed to responsible research, including responsible outdoor research. It kind of reminds me of the responsible research that was going on in a lab in Wuhan, China, where they might have had legitimate and non-nefarious, benign, concerned about their fellow human intentions going in. I mean, they were basically taking a coronavirus that was found in bats on the assumption that it would jump to humans, and they wanted to get ahead of it. So they were researching it, and they were doing something called gain of function research safely. Very safely, of course, and then provoking it to jump from beast to man so that hopefully they could figure out how to create a vaccine. And then, of course, we were subjected to the global shutdown, told to stay home and stay safe. It definitely wasn't a leak from the lab that existed in that exact city, a bioweapons lab run by a bioweapons expert member of the Chinese military. It was 100% a bat that nested 600 miles away from that city, that flew that distance without stopping at all, and then landed in a wet market, gnawed on a pangolin, which puked into a bat stew, and then it was eaten by one person who was patient zero, not multiple people. We were supposed to have believed that. But I'm bringing up the coronavirus pandemic because it seems like you might have good intentions. You might actually believe that the planet has a fever, as Al Gore likes to tell us. Al Gore, who invented the internet. But what right do you have to start messing with an atmosphere that we all share? Aren't we all in this together? And there's actual research that goes along with messing with the atmosphere that shows that not necessarily everything that comes about it is a good thing. We actually have a proof of concept that there are negative consequences. So back to this piece from the Telegraph, which did not actually pop up. There you go. The Telegraph, it talks about all the great things because it's the UK, but I did some deeper research on it. Now, according to the New York Times, ARIA, which again is the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, will be awarded $75 million for researchers to examine ideas for artificially cooling the planet. We've never had any sort of an ice age. Maybe we could kick that off. That'll be fun. Columbia University's climate school noted in April 2024, just about a year ago, that studies show that stratospheric aerosol injection can weaken the ozone layer. Oh man, we already have that hole there and we're going to weaken it further. It could also alter precipitation patterns, so it'll rain and snow not as predictably like the Farmer's Almanac tells us, which might actually affect agriculture and ecosystems. So if you're really worried about the animals, maybe a drought could hurt the swamps and the rainforests, marine life, and air quality, which affects every single person on the planet. Furthermore, a study released a couple months back in December found that solar geoengineering experiments could cause more pollution and damage the ozone layer again. Well, I guess we'll get another hole there, which would cause an increase in mortality. So more people will die because more of us are going to get skin cancer. But the UK is taking it upon itself. They're going to spend $75 million to try to alter the weather, as opposed to inventing reasonable solutions if you were legitimately concerned about the planet's fever and because of our fossil fuels, again, language. Maybe you would commit to doing things like nuclear power, which is very clean and seemingly endless. But we can't do that. We have to rely on the wind turbines, which kill lots of birds. And now it looks like they kill marine life, and they are not predictable and not reliable. We also have to rely on, I guess, seeding the clouds, which I'm not going down that whole rabbit hole, guys. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I was grateful to see Florida get ahead of it, though, and ban that from going on. All right, back into the grab bag. And I talked about the globalists, the global communists. This is a revelation that came out this week about the World Economic Forum, formerly at this point headed by Klaus Schwab, who announced that he's going to be stepping down. He steps down as from the leader and also as a member of the board. Schwab stated, quote, "As I enter my 88th year, I have decided to step down from the position of chair and as a member of the board of trustees with immediate effect," unquote. Now, according to this piece here, this is from France 24, another globalist arm. Misinformation and disinformation topped the World Economic Forum's list of short-term global risks in its latest global risk report. So, you as an individual, the plebeian swine, engaging in free thought and contradicting anything that the Klaus Schwabs of the world push out, that's one of the big things that they want to tamp down on. They want to continue to drill in on the censorship, the global censorship at this point, particularly as we exist in this digital arena right now. They'll just take you down. And if not, they will do what they call shadow ban, and you can talk about everything that you want for an audience of none. Now, I bring this up because there's a part 2 to this. Now, Klaus Schwab, is it just because he's getting older? He's not buying any green bananas when he's 88 years old. Or was there a part 2, which found from The Guardian, yet again, another overseas source, because Klaus Schwab is in a little bit of trouble. The World Economic Forum launched an investigation into Klaus, which prompted him to step down, as it's reported by The Guardian. In an anonymous letter sent to the board of directors by current and former Forum employees, Klaus Schwab and his wife are accused of commingling their personal affairs with World Economic Forum resources. They have no oversight either because he's just so powerful. So Klaus asked junior employees to withdraw thousands of dollars from ATMs on his behalf and use the WEF funds to pay for private in-room massages at hotels. His wife, Hilda, she's also a former WEF employee scheduled token forum-funded meetings in order to justify a luxury holiday travel. So she would schedule meetings because she wanted to go on vacation, and she would have the meetings occur in these great locations that were luxury for her. And she would expense it, of course, to the World Economic Forum. In recent days, Klaus Schwab is said to have railed against the investigation, telling the board members that he denied the allegations and would challenge them, but instead he just stepped down. And I've got a couple of thoughts about Klaus Schwab, about the World Economic Forum, and also just as a refresher for this program. And I think it's worth going into just as a reminder, because we sort of throw out the terminology and talk about the globalists and the communists. It sounds like Alex Jones when I do that. But it is important to know what the WEF advocates for along economic lines, because I've already touched on the global warming climate paganism, but let's talk about the economic lines here. Now, the WEF, the World Economic Forum, they have used language very effectively to advocate for communism globally. Workers of the world unite. We are the plebeian swine here. The proletariat has to unite. But they're doing it very carefully and very expertly with the language that they use, because it doesn't sound nefarious. So what do they actually argue for? Well, they argue for ESG, environmental societal governance, and they argue for a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. They sound a lot alike, but they're completely different, because in a true capitalist society, which we don't have, but we endeavor towards that, you have companies who their sole responsibility is to make decisions to make a profit for people who have invested in the company. So if you buy some stock, the board of directors, the CEO, all the operations are geared towards creating a product or a service that people want, need, and desire, and they will trade their hard-earned money for, so that the company can prosper and the share prices of that company will go up, and the shareholders who have bought in, actually have skin in the game, can make some money. Their wealth will improve. And in fact, if the CEO or the board of directors don't do that, if they actually make decisions that are diametrically opposed to that, you have recourse. That's criminal. You can certainly seek civil penalties. Now, let's talk about what the WEF advocates for. Well, they use environmental societal governance, ESG, to create sort of these false rubrics. They say, look, you have to do what's good for the globe. Are you doing those things? I mean, if you're a bank, are you loaning monies to oil companies? They're polluting. If you're a tennis shoe company, if you make sneakers, if you're Nike, did you see George Floyd died? Have you donated to Black Lives Matter? Ooh, if you don't do that, then we're going to have to take your ESG score down. Now, how does that relate to the stakeholder capitalism that the World Economic Forum advocates for? Well, because no longer, according to stakeholder capitalism, does the board of directors of a particular company or the CEO have a duty to you if you own stock there. They don't have to make a profit for you. They have to do what's good per the ESG score. They got to get the company's score up as high as it possibly can. And when they make decisions that cost you money because they make the company worth less, because they hurt the production of a product, people don't want to buy it. They don't like the service. They're annoyed by the company, so they just don't shop at Target anymore. Well, that's not anything that you can seek recourse for. They don't owe you a responsibility. They owe the stakeholders responsibility, not the shareholders. The stakeholders are everybody, almost like workers of the world unite. Now, to Klaus Schwab specifically, I don't think that he's engaging in anything that other members of the board of trustees for the World Economic Forum aren't. He's a rich, pompous jerk. I'm sure he expenses everything, as do those other board members. But he's turning 88, and I think probably people who were subordinate to him that endeavored to get to his position, another communist, they want to climb that ladder, they'll stab him right between the ribs, right in the back. And they'll introduce these things because they're all compromised. They're all engaging in these activities. And they brought that to the forefront to just edge out the old man. And I'm going to take this over. I don't think this is a sea change in the World Economic Forum. It's going to be next man up, very much like when Elise Stefanik, representative from New York, went after the Ivy League presidents in December of 2023. And everybody on the right was celebrating, we got a scalp, because President Gay from Harvard resigned. Well, she resigned over plagiarism, but whatever you had to use to get rid of her. Well, they just replaced her with another communist. And similarly, I think we'll see the World Economic Forum pick somebody else who shares Klaus Schwab's exact worldview, but maybe a little younger, someone who the compromising material on is a little bit less, more palatable, or at least that individual will have kept it more secret so that when it comes time, when they turn 88 years old, it might be a little bit more difficult to just shuffle them off to the side. All right, back into the grab bag. We're going to talk about the United States Supreme Court, which has a couple of different pieces here today. And this one was covered, and we did not go over it this week because of focusing down on FBI and OD&I classified material. But I do think it's worth it because this is impacting the entire country. And that is the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court temporarily blocked deportations of Venezuelan migrants, as it's reported in Reuters, illegal aliens, under this wartime law, as it's described as a wartime law. It's the Alien Enemies Act. But before, I know if you are a consumer of the news, you know what went on. The Supreme Court punked out. They said they have to have due process for a bunch of illegal aliens who are owed nothing by this country. Talk to me about due process when you talk to me about how the January 6th people were just thrown into a gulag and made to stay there because of superseding indictments that the Department of Justice and the FBI continue to issue to keep them in permanent limbo and ruin their lives. Talk to me about due process. But what actually is the Alien Enemies Act, which I went into and did a little bit of side research because unless you know, you don't know. So it was passed in 1798. We're going back. It's still on the books. It still applies. The executive still is supposed to execute legislation that the legislature debates and passes and is signed by his predecessor. So the Alien Enemies Act was enacted in 1798 to combat spying and sabotage during tensions with France. It authorizes the president to deport, detain, or place restrictions on individuals whose primary allegiance is to a foreign power and who might pose a national security risk in wartime. Or are we at war? Because that's really been the pushback. Are we actually engaged in hostile actions against Venezuela? I know that we've declared the Tren de Aragua members to be a foreign terrorist organization, but are they actual state actors on behalf of Venezuela? Well, the act states it can be invoked, quote, whenever there is a declared war or, not and, or any invasion or predatory incursion. And now we're going to go to what has actually happened or what transpired, what the Joe Biden administration allowed to happen, because he was an administration himself and others who were pulling the strings filled by Marxist communists who wanted to flood the country with, we believe, 20, I believe it's probably more than double that, 50 million illegal aliens. What else would you call that? They flooded the border. That is an invasion. If I read this act properly, the Alien Enemies Act, it says any invasion or predatory incursion or the attempted or threatened a threat against the United States. So I think that that meets the bill. But the Supreme Court is nothing if not institutionalists. They don't really care about the Constitution, and they care about the forest. They don't care about they care about the trees and not the forest. They're going to get wrapped around the axle of something called habeas corpus. Now, people throw that term out. They don't really know what it means. They talk about Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War, and then they really don't know what it means. Well, for clarification, what is habeas corpus? Habeas corpus relief refers to the right of detainees, people who are in custody, to challenge the legality of their detention. It is considered a bedrock right of United States law. So if you're detained, you can challenge the government's ability to detain you. But when I say you, I mean the you who the Bill of Rights applies to, which is American citizens. I don't care about habeas corpus for Tren de Aragua. I don't care about habeas corpus for anyone who illegally crossed the border from Venezuela. I don't care about habeas corpus for any person who illegally came over our border. The fact that the Supreme Court is muddled down in these minutiae, this details. The fact that we have one president who allowed 50 million illegal aliens to come to this country And the next president, who was elected on a mandate to remove those very people, can't do it, per the Supreme Court, I think necessitates an actual evaluation of whether or not we have to disband the Supreme Court. They have no legitimacy. And I don't say that gleefully. I don't like being here. This is not optimal. I wish we had a functioning, small r, Republican constitutional form of government. But we don't. We have a rogue group of judges at both the highest level of the land in the Supreme Court, at the appeals level, and specifically at the district level, who think that they can not only legislate, but execute laws from the bench. And that is not their function. The social compact is completely broken at this point. It's not a legitimate entity, the Supreme Court. And for all the wailing and gnashing of teeth that you will see from the traditional Republicans about we have to obey the rule of law. Why? The other side doesn't. The social compact is an agreement. You are coming to a metaphorical gunfight at the OK Corral with the communists. And the communists brought their 6-shooters and their seconds. They're waiting to fire on you. And you brought a letter from mommy that says Constitution, and otherwise you're completely unarmed. You are not in a position to negotiate with them. They're the terrorists in this situation. And again, this is not optimal. I wish we weren't here. But to just put your head in the sand, to not recognize that, is irresponsible. These battlefield conditions are what they are. And if we have the opportunity, the semblance, for the very short time that there is a modicum of control of the executive branch and the legislative branch, and who knows what the judiciary is doing at this point because of Amy Barrett and John Roberts. Did they have enough Metamucil this morning? Who knows? But you have the executive branch, which will be in dire straits in about 18 months when the Democrats win the House. They'll impeach him right away, and we'll just be mired in that and talking about 2028. It'll be a lame duck for the last 2 years. That's likely going to happen, in my opinion. Now, could you push back on that right now that you have the power? Recognize that you have the power at your fingertips now and execute it. And I think you'll reap some benefits electorally when the people say, hey, we elected you to get rid of these 50 million illegal aliens. And you just said, yeah, Supreme Court told me I couldn't, but they don't have an army. And I asked, where's your army? And they didn't provide one. So I just did it anyway. I think you'll probably see some of the Norm and Normas in the suburbs come to the polls and say, well, thanks for following through on that one, Prez. Maybe I'll allow you to maintain control of the Congress, which is not doing anything, but in effect is not going to impeach the president right now because it's theoretically controlled by Mike Johnson. Now let's go over to another Supreme Court case, which there were some arguments for this week. And it involves a case that Garrett and I have discussed at length. It's about school curriculum in Maryland. This comes from NPR, which I'm sure will be very right down the middle. After all, they are provided tax dollars. They're not partisan whatsoever. Supreme Court weighs who should decide public school curriculum, judges or school boards. Now, Montgomery County, Maryland, according to NPR, is the most religiously diverse county in the United States, with 160,000 students of almost all faiths. The school board approved 5 storybooks with LGBTQ plus rainbow kamikaze characters for use in elementary school classes. The avowed purpose was to teach students tolerance and respect for LGBTQ plus students and parents. But some parents objected. I mean, they're probably those people who read their Bible, right? They were contending that the exposure to the approved materials conflicted with their religious beliefs. Why would that ever happen? Now, as an aside here, if indeed Montgomery County, Maryland is the most religiously diverse, the fact that you now have a collection of Christian parents and Jewish parents and Muslim parents and who knows, climate pagan parents, they all came to the same conclusion though. They've all pushed back on the school board and said, we don't agree on the one true God. We don't know where anybody's eternal souls are going, or at least we believe that ours are, but everybody else, good luck. But we do agree that teaching our kids that sodomy is a good thing and cutting off their genitals will actually change them from XX to XY. That's not good. And that's not in keeping with our faith principles. And I'm always quick to defend, but also loath to defend the religious freedom argument, because you absolutely do have that right and you should fight for it at all cost. But I'm tired of having to rely on that crutch. This is just wrong. As a parent, I indoctrinate my kids. I don't like the conservative argument that schools should not be in the business of indoctrinating students. They should be in the business of teaching the students the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. You shouldn't be indoctrinating them at all. Don't teach them what to think. Teach them how to think. No, that's garbage. I want my children indoctrinated. The reason I had people, the reason I have small people living in my house, was to indoctrinate them into the correct view, the correct worldview that will allow them to prosper in life and actually attain the afterlife. That is my function as a biological being, as a spiritual being, as a citizen of the country. I want my children indoctrinated into my worldview, and as a citizen, I have a say in what is taught to them. Now, one of the proud moments that I've had was both my boys started playing the Madden, and they started playing college football on their Xbox. They just got it. I'm trying to keep it under control. It's really hard, folks. But they're playing college football, and I tell you what, it's really realistic. They have a lot of the features of the various schools, and they come out and they have the traditions and the songs, and I'm seeing their heads bob as they're playing some garbage hip hop song in the background over the fantasy stadium loudspeaker. And I just roll my eyes and I say, that's an awful song. There's a reason that rap and crap rhyme. My dad told me that one. And he's true, because he indoctrinated me. And I said, that is a song that lets a bunch of white chicks pretend and dance around like zombies, and it's awful. And then a couple days go by and they're playing the game again. And that song comes on again, and the heads aren't bobbing anymore. And my eldest son says to me, gosh, that's an awful song that the people dance out like they're zombies too. Mission accomplished. I successfully indoctrinated my boys into realizing the correct fact that rap is crap. Now, that's a fun aside, but back to this case in front of the Supreme Court, because not all parties agree, which is why it's reached the highest court in the land as they considered arguments for it this week. So the school board initially allowed parents to opt their kids out of regular classes with some LGBTQ plus rainbow kamikaze content. The board eventually found that it was just too difficult and too disruptive. It was too difficult, too disruptive, because so many kids came from families that said, you are not indoctrinating my kids into that madness. So now they just made it required, and we're going all the way to the Supreme Court on it. Now, the defense of this comes from a couple of Ivy professors. Yale law professor Justin Driver, and Stanford, well, it's not Ivy, but it kind of is. Stanford law professor emeritus Eugene Volokh. They filed a friend of the court brief, an emeritus brief, and they sided with the school board in this case. The scholars maintain that there is no evidence of coercion here, even though you're being forced by a government entity, public schools, to submit and allow your children to be indoctrinated into a worldview with which you have a moral disagreement with, you have an objection to. That's not coercion here, according to a Yale and Stanford professor. They maintain no evidence of coercion. Rather, quote, it seems to me that the process is working as it should. People have raised objections. The school district has heard those objections, and they modified their practice. Yeah, they modified it away from allowing you to not sit and learn about how Harry can become Sally to you must. That's the actual modification. So it was modified in the direction which these two communist professors like. So they said, well, the system worked. What is your objection? And it reminded me, again, of a movie clip, which we played before for unrelated reasons. But Jeff Goldblum is hilarious. And I think he sort of sounds out, well, the system worked. So what is your objection to a concept that should raise concerns? This comes from Man of the Year.
What I mentioned to you in my email.
Why did you decide to test the system?
I don't know.
Why did you need to run a test at such a high count?
I don't know.
What did you expect to find? If you found a system error, how are you going to fix it?
I'm not sure.
Well, look into your soul and ask yourself this question. Why would you test the computer to such limits With so few days left to fix a problem, if you found a problem.
I was just double checking.
Do you want to destroy this company? Because that's what you very well may do. You understand the ramifications. Do you want to put over 1,000 employees out of work? Do you?
But the election will be a fraud.
Here it is in the sensible light of day. The people are voting. There is an election. The democratic process is at work. The only sour note, they won't end up with the person that they voted for to be the president of the United States. But we can celebrate the process. The democratic process, which we hold so dear, will have worked.
If the system would have worked. I mean, they engaged in the vote, just that the outcome didn't come out as it should have. But why are you objecting to this? They followed a process, even though it went into a favor that we wanted, as opposed to what the actual constituents wanted, we the people. What are you objecting to? Now, hopefully, Amy Barrett and John Roberts and Gorsuch take their Metamucil, have their morning glory, and rule correctly here, because it's pretty clear to me that the parents should be in control. And if they rule the other way, I think that the parents should just force it anyway. Because again, the courts have lost all legitimacy at this point. Let's pivot over to student loans. Now, this was a hot button issue during the Biden administration because Joe Biden, or at least his minders, continue to do what I believe the Trump administration should do, and that is just do things, because we exist in a fundamentally broken system. The social compact is shattered. The small r Republican constitutional form of government no longer exists. It's in name only. We are effectively ruled by a dictator who we elect every 4 years. And he just kept trying to forgive student loans. And he actually did quite a bit. But there was this pause put on student loans during coronavirus when we shut down the world to flatten the economy. But now the Trump administration is going to turn the spigot back on. This is reporting from Axios, which, again, this is the left-wing source. Axios is going to argue against this, but nevertheless, we'll dig in. With millions in default on student loan payments, collections to resume. Bum, bum, bum. This move ends a 5-year pause of no penalties for those who did not make payments on their student loans. So you took out debt to pay for your education, and you just welched on it. You just never paid for 5 years, and now you want my sympathy. You want the American people's sympathy, the people who are going to be on the hook to pay for it when you don't, because so many of these people don't. How many, of course? Well, according to Axios, 5.3 million borrowers who are in default could see their wages garnished if they don't resume payments, because student loans, very much like tax debt, are the only debts that are not bankruptable. If you declare Chapter 11, you can basically clear the slate, go nuclear, but you can't get rid of your student loans. Why? Well, because you owe them to the government. Same thing with tax debt. 42.7 million borrowers owe more than $1.6 trillion. We're approaching $2 trillion in student loan debt. And anybody across the political spectrum, you will hear it continually from the right and from the left, from all. We have a student loan crisis in this country, and yet the federal government still continues to issue them and artificially, as a result of that, inflate the price of colleges, because the colleges know that kids are indoctrinated by the Montgomery County school districts and others like them to believe that they have to go to college. And we've set up systems now in the professional workspace that formerly could have been filled by people who did not have a college degree, that were just competent individuals, had a high school diploma, good head on their shoulders. Well, you need a college degree now to have those jobs, like be a barista. They want to see a college degree. Look, indefinitely suspended forever FBI agent, going on 31 months now. Oh, and by the way, today is 31 months for Garrett. You need a college degree, or at least it's preferred to be a shelf stocker at Walmart. I know because I looked. Now, we've artificially inflated the prices of college because the pressure is put on the kids. They have to go to college. They get the federal loans just handed out to them. And the colleges say, well, as long as Uncle Sam's putting the bill, let's just keep jacking up the price and hiring as many communists as we possibly can, not just to be instructors and professors, but just into administration. Oh, actually, let's get more grant writers in place so we can get more federal government grants, which is somewhere in the area of $60 billion now that our university system is getting from the government. And the last one, note here from the Axios, is that 38% of student loan borrowers are making payments in our current. So more than 6 in 10 people who have a student loan payment are not making payments. And they're about to get smacked in the face with it during a time where we have a lot of economic unrest. We have the tariffs going on. Cost of living certainly went up astronomically during the Biden administration, and actually during the Trump administration, particularly during the last year when we just sent out buckets of cash to people, told them to stay home, stay safe, and take your stimmy check to go shop at big box stores. Now the federal government's going to turn that spigot back on, demand that people pay back the loans because we need money. And the other thing that we can do instead of raising money is cut what we're spending on, which I don't believe there's a lot of appetite for from Donald Trump. He is, after all, a Democrat from the 1990s, big spender. He makes no secret about that. It's certainly something that I disagree with him on. But I do agree with him on this, and I believe the American Radicals audience will as well. And this comes from the Washington Post because, throughout to Garrett, democracy dies in darkness. The IRS is going to close more than 110 offices with their taxpayer assistance centers. Well, the Washington Post is decrying this as probably a bad thing because they are a leftist rag. Last week, the IRS started laying off approximately 7,000 probationary employees. Excellent. Get rid of them. At least 113 taxpayer assistance centers will have their leases terminated or not renewed when they expire. And that's per the GSA, which basically manages properties for the federal government. It's unclear whether the assistance centers, which provide free in-person help for tax filers on an appointment basis, will relocate or they will simply close. Hopefully they close down. The IRS in recent years opened up more assistance centers, and they did that because of the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the Green New Deal that was pushed out in 2022 by the Biden administration. So they said they did that so they could help people file their taxes free of charge. Why don't you just simplify the taxes? Why don't you just go to a flat tax? That's pretty easy to understand. You could do it all in the back of a postcard, but then you couldn't have more people. 7,000 probationary employees, that means they've been employed by the federal government for less than 2 years, which means that they applied for and were hired by the Joe Biden administration. Where do you think their sentiments are? Let's get as many communists as we possibly can into the system so that we can exercise the power when we have it, which is unfortunately one of the shortcomings that we're seeing now. We're seeing in some avenues, the USAID cut downs. We're seeing the Doge go after. We're seeing Linda McMahon as a Secretary of Education. Sean Duffy just being funny and ripping on Blue Origin. But we're not seeing the cuts. And I think that the spending, as I've railed on forever, is the primary cause of people's problems. I mean, we can talk all we want about tariffs and how we want to shift away from an income tax and have a external tax. We're going to tax other nations. And I'm not an economist. I don't even play one on the American Radicals podcast. I am concerned that the messaging has been poor about the economic pain that people are going to feel because they're still suffering from Biden inflation, which, truthfully, the initial Biden inflation was a result of the Trump spending during coronavirus. So there's mutual blame to go around here. But certainly, Joe Biden just put the pedal to the metal and continued to spend outrageous, incredible amounts, which the Republican House and the Republican president have failed to bring back in. They're still spending the exact same amount. And as a result of that, the more you spend or the more money you put out into the system, it provides more dollars chasing those goods, and the dollars become worth less and the goods cost more. Similarly, along those lines, I was disturbed about this one from the New York Post. Trump backs a $5,000 baby bonus for new moms in bid to reverse declining birth rates. Sounds like a good idea, according to Donald Trump. Now, President Trump endorsed giving new mothers a financial reward after a report surfaced that the White House was considering handing out up to $5,000 per delivery, per baby, to reverse the decline in U.S. birth rates. Now, certainly Elon Musk is boys now with Donald Trump, and he's nothing if not a evangelist that we need to have more babies, and I completely agree with that. We're now below replacement rate. So another option being considered would have the government fund programs to educate women on their menstrual cycles. So the default here is we recognize a problem. We say we're not having enough babies. Perhaps people are coming to the inevitable conclusion that it is very expensive to have children. And I'm sorry, $5,000 isn't going to be that much help. But perhaps they're looking out at the economic conditions and they're saying, I can't afford to have a kid. I want to. It's just, I don't want to have my kid in poverty. Now, that's a reasonable conclusion to come to, particularly if you are in that breeding age right now and you're paying off the student loans and you're looking at the grocery bills continuing to go up and you are not earning what the Klaus Schwabs of the world are bringing down. Does the government spending more money in order to give $5,000 to people or setting up information centers to teach the ladies about their happy days? That doesn't seem like a way to reduce inflation. The solution should never be the government. It's always the worst solution, even when it's the only solution. That's a famous phrase by the Kyle Seraphin Show, but it's true and accurate. How about you just cut all this stuff out? That would probably result in prices coming down. It makes no sense for us ever to have inflation. It makes no sense for us to have a desirable inflation level, which is what the Federal Reserve aspires to be, around 2% inflation. You would think that as we get better and more prolific at producing goods and developing best practices, that they would be cheaper. So we should have deflation, but that has never happened in the history of the country. Now, everybody's struggling, and nobody's immune from the prices. And that might be a good explanation for why I have the next story about one of the richest athletes to ever live, LeBron James. And Kamala Harris reportedly cut him a $50,000 check to his media company for event production. And it's been well documented how the Kamala Harris campaign blew through like $1 billion in 100 days. And one of them was through giving big chunks of money to celebrities. So I was able to find out a little bit about LeBron James and how he took the money and ran with it. And he didn't necessarily come out and go to events as other groups did and other individuals. So it looks like Oprah sat down with $1 million. We got Beyonce for $165,000. She did a 4-minute speech. Look, I'm going on here 45 minutes. $165,000. That's a good pay rate. Kamala Harris paid $100,000 to a shell company for Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, and they appeared at several events. You have $58,000 to Cardi B, and the Harris campaign donated $5 million to activist groups, including $500,000 to Reverend Al Sharpton, who did a nice, sympathetic sit-down interview for her. And we have Ben Affleck, Jennifer Gardner, took $35,000. But back to LeBron, because he's struggling. I mean, maybe he needs to have some kids and get $5,000 from Donald Trump's government here. This was what he put out in return for $50,000. This was 1 minute, 15 seconds. Let's hear what Bron's got.
All right. Heck yeah. It's cool. Black guy. That's one of my buddies. We had fun. We carved watermelons together. It was awesome.
No, I'm not a racist.
They're taking black jobs now.
The whole country's going to be it'll be like Detroit.
A lot of it's about the genes, isn't it? Don't you believe?
They're poisoning the blood of our country. Troublemaker. These are troublemakers. Look, I love the old days, you know? Do you know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Now, if you had one really violent day, like one rough hour, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately.
But we're going to indemnify police officers and law enforcement from being destroyed by the radical left. You're changing history, you're changing culture.
Of course I hate these people.
And let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need.
Wow, very moving piece from LeBron James there. Everything out of context, and I guess he was implying that Donald Trump was firing water hoses on civil rights protesters. But he got $50,000 out of it, so good for him. Now let's go over to the Tesla burnings. Now we've alluded to this, and I'm just putting it out there. You will see increasingly lots of press statements, press releases, and commercials, and whatever they have advertising from the federal government about Tesla burning dealerships, prosecutions related to that, and Tren de Aragua deportations. Now, are they really greatly impacting your way of life? No, but they poll really well. So you're going to see that, which this one should be disturbing. And this comes from Minnesota, reported in the New York Post about this guy who burned like 6 Teslas, $20,000 in damage. He works for the state government in Minnesota. I do like how they say that he works for Tim Walz. I mean, I guess it's technically correct, but I don't think he's texting with Tim Walz. But this guy, who's 33 years old, his name is Dylan Adams, 33, and gainfully employed, and feels compelled to go key people's cars because he's not emotionally disturbed whatsoever. But I think he's just the id of the communists in the United States of America. So he's the suspected vandal, and he's not been convicted, so we can't say that he actually committed this, but he was spotted keying vehicles and stripping their paint off, caught on camera. The Hennepin County District Attorney, Mary Moriarty, she's going to seek diversion, though, rather than criminal charges. Quote from the district attorney: "This is an approach taken in many property crime cases and helps to ensure the individual keeps their job and can pay restitution, as well as reducing the likelihood of repeat offenses." What's going to reduce the likelihood of repeat offenses if you don't go to jail? And similarly, we talked about due process and habeas corpus as it pertains to Venezuelans being deported. Back to J6. The property damage was less than $20,000. I mean, it was inflated because the government liked to say it cost $1 million, but it was probably a couple $100 worth of glass, and people went to prison for it. But she's a George Soros installed, we'll say, district attorney, and that's what the communists do. They punish their enemies, and reward their friends. And Dylan Adams is a friendly who's going to continue to work for the government in Minnesota. And I'm sure when he has an opportunity from his post, whatever it is, he will do the exact same thing. And he's kind of walking that line, that fine line between the elite communists and the street communists, because he's going out and doing street communist stuff, but he also is going to be in a power to help others who are not as well placed as he is in the state of Minnesota. And it was also reminded me of this sort of behavior, because the elites are going to continue to encourage that. That's what this district attorney's declination is going to result in. More of this. The dog whistle is here. Look, we're not going to punish you for it. We will give you some community service, which you'll get to pick where it goes to. So you can go work at an abortion clinic. That's great. Fantastic. And reminded of the first Trump administration and Maxine Waters going out there, as long as we're going to throw videos of things and sort of assign guilt and blame to individuals, because apparently, per LeBron James, Donald Trump was firing water hoses on civil rights protesters. Well, I think you could draw a shorter line in connecting Dylan's behavior in 2025 to Maxine Waters in 2021. And this is her addressing a group of vile, vicious communists.
If we can't protect the children, we can't protect anybody. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome. The people are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you.
Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C. Not in the U.S.
Our issue is strong borders, no crime. Their issue is open borders. Let MS-13 all over our country. That's what's going to happen if you listen to them.
they're going to continue it, guys. They're going to continue it. And they're getting people who have already lived through one Trump administration when he didn't act like Adolf Hitler. So we have a proof of concept there, and still came to the conclusion that he was still a dictator in waiting, a fascist. So they're the most emotionally disturbed people. People have been continued to be groomed and pushed, and those who are primed to engage in violent action, which will be a good pivot for the last story that I got for today. And I'm just going to skip over. I got some more others, but we're going to wait for Garrett to come back because I got some good ones about some judges acting crazy. But I wanted to get to this one. This comes from Wired magazine. I feel like outside of New York Post today, I pulled a lot of left-wing sources. So that's good on me, right? I read it so you didn't have to. This one, though, is worth the read. This one comes from Wired magazine. The title of the piece is, "This College Protester Isn't Real. It's an AI-powered undercover bot for cops." And we talk about emotionally disturbed people. We always like to allude to the playbook that the FBI likes to use to entrap individuals. Emotionally disturbed people are always the most vulnerable, people who they groom and convince to do their worst possible idea using an informant and undercovers and online covert employees, because the presumption is that they were always guilty, even though they were never predisposed or even capable of carrying out a violent action. But now it's on autopilot, per Wired. Cops are paying to deploy AI-powered bots across social media and the internet to talk to people they suspect, there it is, are anything from violent sex criminals all the way to vaguely defined, quote, protesters, with the hopes of generating evidence that can be used against them. So we are just admitting it. The company that created this AI software is called Massive Blue. And they're selling this software called Overwatch to police departments. It markets it as AI-powered force multiplier for public safety that deploys lifelike virtual agents which infiltrate and engage criminal networks across various channels. Well, how would you describe a criminal network? Could it be a Signal chat group? Could it be somebody on 4chan? Could it be a Second Amendment advocacy Facebook group? Well, now they don't even have to send the online covert employee into there to befriend them and then betray them and backstab them and turn them on over to the FBI to prosecute. Instead, they can just deploy the artificial intelligence to go in there and communicate with individuals there and find the most primed and ready person, the person who's maybe not playing with the highest level of IQ, someone who could probably benefit from a quality education, not what you would get from Montgomery County, Maryland, someone who probably is not going to take out a $200,000 loan so they can go to Vanderbilt, but just like a regular person. And we're going to go after them. We're going to assign artificial intelligence to do the heavy lifting for us. We don't even have to sit there anymore. And the government is paying for this. They're using your tax dollars in order to do this for your protection, of course. It's all about safety. Back to Wired magazine. Overwatch uses AI-generated images and text to create social media profiles that can interact with suspected drug traffickers, human traffickers, and gun traffickers. Well, that sounds all like a very good thing. It'll never go astray. After Overwatch scans open social media, and they can do that in seconds, by the way, it channels for potential suspects. Not even a suspect, a potential suspect, potential red meat. These AI personas can also communicate with suspects over text, Discord, and other messaging services. So you want to take this conversation private? You want to take it off of Facebook? Yeah, it'll jump on Discord with you. Oh, it'll text with you. Maybe jump on Signal. A, quote, radicalized AI protest persona. These are some of the AI bots that it puts out there. It poses as a 36-year-old divorced woman who is lonely and has no children and is interested in baking activism and body positivity. Other personas are a 14-year-old boy who they try to use for child trafficking, an AI pimp, a college protester, an external recruiter for protests, escorts, there's a honeypot, and juveniles. That's all available, all artificial intelligence to just look and find the next red meat to provide to the police entity. It could be local, likely going to be federal because they have a much deeper pool of funds to use. And they're not even going to have to employ a person. So we can continue to lay off the probationary employees, like they're doing at the IRS. Hey, let's get rid of 7,000 probationary employees. We can just get some AI. So this is something to keep on the radar, something to look at, even if you have like an FBI, which I'm not going to hold my breath for, but an FBI that says, look, we're getting rid of several thousand agents because they're just not cutting it. Well, now they can just seek this Overwatch technology from this company, Massive Blue. I've got 2 videos to send us off on today, guys. This one just made me laugh because communists are retarded. And I do enjoy when they eat their own and they get called out. We have a new president. We've had one now for almost 100 days. But there was a lot of conversation now is a retrospective as Joe Biden, the human Roomba, has returned to the stage and he's seeking $300,000 to speak. And there was a lot of concern and a lot of call for the other communists who just lied to our faces and said that he wasn't a dementia patient for all that time. And this was an interview that Liz Warren, Pocahontas, gave, and she was put under a little bit of pressure of, Madam Senator, why did you lie to us?
Do you regret saying that President Biden had a mental acuity? He had a sharpness to him. You said that up until July of last year.
I said what I believe to be true.
And you think he was as sharp as you?
I said I had not seen decline. And I hadn't at that point.
You did not see any decline from 2024 Joe Biden to 2021 Joe Biden?
Not when I said that. You know, the thing is, he was sharp. He was on his feet. I saw him. Live event. I had meetings with him a couple of times.
Senator, on his feet is not praise. He can speak in sentences is not praise.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Look, I don't agree with that guy most likely on just about anything except that. Except that. I've talked about it before. The descriptor of this person is sharp as a tack means that they're a dementia patient. It's just on its face. And I did really appreciate the vile witch who is Elizabeth Warren and the hubris that you could see. And if you're listening to this, you did not see how Elizabeth Warren, when that guy asked her if Joe Biden was as sharp and as smart as her, she just kind of starts to suppress a laugh because she's very uncomfortable, but also nobody's as smart as me. I'm Liz Warren. I'm going to go get me a beer. Now, I do have a palate cleanser today, guys, but I am going to channel my inner at GOB actual and try to leave you with a nice biblical worldview of the day. I will not do it as eloquently as him, but I pulled this one. It comes from Exodus chapter 9, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews says, let my people go so that they may worship me. Now, how is that relevant to what we're talking about today? Now, I think if you had to characterize the American Radicals podcast, we definitely have conservative bent, probably more libertarian. And I think that let my people go is pure libertarianism. But if you notice, the verse doesn't end there. Let my people go implies liberty. But there's a second part. So that they may worship me. And that means that liberty and libertarianism has to be funneled through a holistic worldview where you recognize certain truths, you recognize good, you recognize evil, and you're willing to submit yourself to that. You're willing to indoctrinate your children into that perspective. And when you do that, you can actually pursue true liberty. It's not just unfettered debauchery, because if the market will provide whatever people want, there has to be moral sentiments attached. The market might demand child sexual abuse material because people have money and they're willing to spend it. The moral sentiment, the so that they may worship me aspect to it says, no, get behind me, Satan. We're not going to allow that. I think that that's what's being channeled by the parents in Montgomery County, Maryland. It's what we try to channel here on this program. It's what we are always going to do and that is present to you facts and truth, advocate for freedom, but also make sure that it's harnessed and is truly answering to a higher power. So it was not my best, certainly not as good as what Garrett could offer, but I give it the old college try today, guys. And I want to leave you with a nice palate cleanse. This one is about family. We actually are all about family, but sometimes you might have issues with the in-laws, and that is, again, the subject for today's palate cleanse.
Hey, sir. You know I pulled you over tonight?
Yeah, I got a pretty good idea. Hey, I got a big favor to ask you. You mind if I step out of the car for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Let's step back here.
Okay.
So you saw the lady in the passenger seat, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's my wife. And the lady in the back seat, did you see her?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though. Are you married?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. All right, here we go. So that's the mother-in-law in the back, right? Those two got in a huge fight this morning, and the mother-in-law insisted we take her home right away. So that's what I'm trying to do, get her home. I'm worried they're going to make up, and then, she's going to live with us another 6 months, right? So I got to get her home before those two make up, okay?
All right, so I'm going to give you a full police escort.
Okay.
I'm going to turn on the sirens, keep the lights on. By the glory of God, we will get you there.
That's not very nice. Hey, that's 2 palate cleanses in a row. Not nice, but funny. All right, guys. I want to thank you again for joining us today on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, just give us a thumbs up. Give us a follow. You want to subscribe here on rumble.com/amradpod. We appreciate it. Definitely subscribe and tell a friend about our streaming on iTunes and iHeart and Spotify. Guys, I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back with you Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern time, as we always do. Until then, guys, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.